There's something strange happening in motorcycling. Not necessarily on the roads themselves, but in the conversations on the sidelines. If you listen to riders today at bike night or at the dealerships or in online forums, comment sections, or podcasts, you'd think that we're living in the golden age of expertise, that we're at the height of motorcycling intellect. You would believe that decades from now, people will look back on Ryan F9 and Ari Henning with the same fondness that modern academics study Immanuel Kant and Socrates. With access to infinite information, everyone has become so sure of themselves. Everyone has a platform, a hot take, valuable insight that you could never have figured out on your own. Well, if everyone is so damn smart, why do we not exist in a motorcycling utopia? Why are accident rates not dramatically decreasing? Why do I have to tell people it's a bad idea to start on a 600 Supersport every single spring season? Because the gap between how confident riders sound and how competent they are has never been wider. We have somehow created a culture where nearly everyone feels like an authority, even when they're not. Why does modern motorcycling create so much certainty and so little self-doubt? Let's jump in. Motorcycling has a unique psychological trap built into it that almost no other hobby shares. It's one of the few activities with life and death consequences, where you can make serious mistakes yet not be punished immediately. And when that happens, your brain draws a very dangerous conclusion. You didn't crash, so you must have done it right. This is called survival bias. You see it in combat pilots, extreme sports athletes, and even speculative stock traders. All people who survive risky behavior long enough to start mistaking luck for skill. Motorcyclists experience this constantly. A rider enters a corner too hot, upsetting the chassis and feeling the rear tires start to step out a little bit, yet the bike corrects itself and they ride out of the corner unscathed. The adrenaline spike is massive. The memory of that experience becomes emotionally charged. But because nothing bad happened, you actually get positive chemical feedback. Your brain logs it as a competency instead of a warning. I mean, we've all felt that, right? You get that really scary moment and then you feel really excited. You know, our brains are kind of broken, right? The problem is that these near misses don't feel like mistakes. They feel like harrowing success stories. I saved it, I handled it, I wrote it out. But what you actually experienced was the narrowest margin between you and disaster. And over time, this creates a warped self-image. Riders begin to see themselves as people who can handle these challenging scenarios, even though the only thing they have proven is that they've not yet been punished. In previous generations, riding culture was local. You learned from people you rode with. You were shaped by their influence and their experience. If someone gave you bad advice, they could see the resulting consequences in real life. The internet has broken that system. Today, knowledge is instant, shallow, and pretty abstracted. New riders are exposed to thousands of opinions every week, all presented with the same visual authority. A 23-year-old with 2 seasons of riding and an action camera can speak with the same confidence and reach as a racer with decades of experience. And because algorithms reward clarity and confidence, not nuance or complexity, the most simple and shameless ideas tend to win out. We are living in the first era in human history where everyone has access to almost all of the information, but no one is required to demonstrate understanding. The result is a culture that confuses certainty with truth. Young people are not learning how to think about riding, and then how to apply that thought process to a tangible experience. They are just learning how to perform as a rider. It's all theoretical. They repeat phrases, memorize the hot takes of their favorite creators, and internalize talking points. They gain knowledge, but not the wisdom that comes from experience. That's why a teenager with a Chinese pit bike can tell you the best 200 horsepower bike to buy for less than 20 grand with maximum confidence. And he'll do so entirely unsolicited. Is it really a worthwhile opinion if it has never been tested against reality? You see this elsewhere. Look at online finance gurus. Thousands of people who have never read a balance sheet speak with absolute certainty about stocks, crypto, or macroeconomics. They repeat phrases like bullish, dead cat bounce, or short squeeze. They feel knowledgeable because they can speak the language with only a cursory understanding of the matter. And of course, AI is making this a whole lot worse. Instead of people spending time and really understanding subject matters, they just ask for an LLM to summarize it for them. You need that deep knowledge. You need the wisdom. Or there's fitness grifters, or political experts, or whatever other online niche with high CPMs that incentivize creators to strive and milk you for your attention. In these environments, people are free to make content as if they're experts, and as long as they execute the visual style that lends credence to being an authority within a niche, it will be consumed by people who know even less of the topic. Motorcycling is no different. The internet doesn't directly make bad riders, but it makes overly confident ones. And confidence without the grounding of experience is how people start mistaking knowledge for experience. There is a well-documented psychological phenomenon that explains so much about the behavior of overconfident motorcyclists. It's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, and I'm sure you've heard of it. It describes the brutal truth of how human beings relate to competence. The simplest explanation is that it's a cognitive bias where people with low ability in a specific area overestimate their competence because their lack of knowledge prevents them from recognizing their own mistakes. When someone begins learning a complex skill, like riding a motorcycle, their first exposure creates an enormous sense of clarity. Everything feels new, exciting, and surprisingly understandable at a very basic level. Patterns emerge, basic rules form a rudimentary understanding. Early successes come quickly and with relative ease. The learner can kind of see themselves figuring it out. This produces a really powerful psychological effect that researchers call the peak of inflated confidence. Motorcycling seems like it was perfectly designed to launch riders right to the top of that peak. In the first months of riding, your biggest barrier is typically fear. You're worried about stalling, tipping over, or other vehicles in traffic, or just simply staying upright on this bike. Those fears are usually quelled rather quickly, and that feels like a major breakthrough. You can flow through corners and hold your own in traffic. You no longer feel totally overwhelmed. Your brain interprets this as mastery, but what you've achieved is far from expertise. It's just basic fluency. You've learned how to not be bad, but that's about it. At this point, a new rider has enough experience to feel competent, but not enough experience to see the vast complexity of what they haven't learned yet. Despite this is when riders start giving advice themselves, forming strong opinions, and arguing online. Only later, and if they keep riding and exposing themselves to more challenging scenarios, does the uncomfortable truth begin to emerge. They realize how much they missed, all the variables they ignored, and how often they were just really lucky instead of skilled. This tough realization is actually a major turning point in your riding career, a blow to your ego that results in realization and continued growth. But many riders never get past this stage. They simply get stuck on the peak of inflated confidence, where things feel clear and simple. It's also why the loudest voices are often not the most experienced, because paradoxically, Dunning-Kruger tells us that true experience actually results in uncertainty and underestimation of ability. What's green, has a flying V, and is guaranteed a date with your mom? Well, that's me on this Moto Guzzi V7 Sport. If you want to prevent that reality from happening, you gotta go to GameDude.co and become a member and earn your chances to win this bike. You gotta take this thing away from me. I am a menace on this machine. You think you look cool on your S1000 RRs, your leader bikes, your blah, blah, blah. This is what's cool, baby. Your mom, she's into the retro stuff. She remembers the 80s. I'm coming over there right now. If you gotta stop me, head to the website and become a member. That's the only way to do it. Now let's get back to the show. Confidence has amazing effects in social settings because it's not just a feeling, it's a signal you send to others. In every human group, confidence communicates status. The person who sounds sure of themselves is assumed to be competent. Hesitation implies weakness. It's an ancient instinct well predating the TikTok charlatans of the 21st century, let alone motorcycling. It comes from the psychology of human survival. When the environment is harsh and resources are scarce, the animal part of your brain will respond to the most confident person in the village, not the quiet strategist or anybody else. culture of motorcycling ties into this instinct. Riding is a high-risk, high-status activity. You are balancing on two wheels at triple-digit speeds. This attracts people naturally who are drawn to risk, adrenaline, and self-determination. When you put a bunch of these people together in a group, you get a culture that perceives intensity and confidence as morally superior. So, when a rider speaks confidently, they are not just sharing information, but also saying, "I belong." Humility, on the other hand, signals vulnerability. It says, "I'm still learning. I might be wrong. I might need help." That's emotionally healthy, but socially dangerous, because in the male-dominated world of motorcycling, being open to correction feels like submission. So riders learn very quickly what the culture rewards. Confidence earns respect, and uncertainty gets ignored. That's why you get people who say, "I'm not a beginner, I rode dirt bikes when I was a kid," or "I can get a liter bike as my first bike, I drove a V6 manual Mustang in high school, I used to speed a lot, I'm prepared for this." People overinflate their experience to move past the beginner stage as quickly as possible, because you don't want to seem like you don't know what you're doing. Motorcycling has always been entangled with masculinity. Let's just call a spade, folks. Speed, danger, control, noise, dominance, these are all things that are coded as male. For many people, riding is more than just recreation or a fun way to commute. It's a stage for identity. That's why riding culture can be so combative. People arguing about tires, oil, horsepower, all with the conviction of a religious doctrine. It's not about the topic itself, it's about being dominant. It's why people want to roll race with their buddies or keep up in the twisties. They use motorcycles to bolster their ego and identity among the other men in their community. In theory, reality should correct false confidence, but in practice, it often doesn't. Motorcycling allows people to get away with being wrong for a very long time, especially when so many people are engaging with the community predominantly online. Mistakes don't always result in crashes, bad habits don't always lead to terrible consequences, and when something does finally go wrong, well, excuses are made. Copium is huffed. When a culture becomes emotionally invested in confidence, it has to invent ways to protect that confidence from reality. That's how we arrive at rider copes. Not just lame excuses, but psychological defense mechanisms. I know you guys love talking about these. A cope is a narrative that allows someone to preserve their self-image in the face of glaringly contradictory evidence. They'll say things like, "They don't make them like they used to," not because old bikes are better, but because they can't afford to ride anything newer than a 2005 Suzuki Bandit. They'll say, "If you're not crashing, you're not pushing hard enough." Not because that's true, but because they crash due to poor technique or an incorrect input. These aren't technical statements, they're emotional safeguards, and copes are all over in motorcycling, in person and online, serving to make someone confident about their shortcomings instead of choosing to be better. True riding skill has the opposite effect of these overconfident copes. It makes you quieter, more reflective, and more understanding. Experienced riders tend not to speak in absolute definitive statements because they know there is not one blanket answer for every rider in every situation. When you've been riding for a long time, you know how difficult it is to succinctly explain the subtle nuances of a specific skill or scenario. And you also realize the futility of arguing over oil weights or horsepower figures. It just feels tiring. You don't need to announce how good you are because you aren't trying to convince yourself. An experienced rider maintains curiosity and thoughtfulness and appreciation for the finer details. When discussing riding, it is usually qualified with an "it depends" or "in this situation," because there isn't a one-size-fits-all explanation for so many of the aspects of riding that we talk about. The most dangerous riders are often the loudest, the most self-assured, whereas the most capable riders are the ones that are hard to spot. You can think of it like the old adage, "Speak softly but carry a big stick." Motorcycling suffers from too much confidence in the wrong places. When speaking with absolute certainty becomes part of the performance, your curiosity dies. The riders who get better are not the ones who sound the most sure of themselves. That cocktail of adrenaline and ego makes for one hell of a drug. I know that much. Thanks so much for watching all the way to the end. I truly do appreciate it. I'll catch you in the next one.